Hello and welcome to this very special episode of the CNET Development Dialogues. I am Maluncho, and today I have with me a very special guest, Professor Nancy Folbre. Professor Nancy Folbre is Professor of Economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and her research focuses on the interface between feminist theory and economics. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
So your work centers around a very important role that women do in the economy, that is through their care work. And you've been very critical of mainstream economics, which completely ignores the important role that women play through unpaid care work. So tell us something about your critique of mainstream economics and the important role that women play in economies.
Okay. I wouldn't say that standard neoclassical theory ignores the benefits of women's unpaid work. It just treats them as though they're purely psychological. Like, oh, women do this because they derive satisfaction from it, and it makes them happy, and it's in their nature, in a sense, to enjoy doing this. Well, I think that's true, but it's also true that women are providing services that benefit other people. And if women weren't providing those services for free, other people would have to pay for them. So what's missing from the conventional analysis is an appreciation of the benefits to others and to the economy as a whole. So I don't think it's inconsistent to say that women both derive a lot of intrinsic satisfaction from care, but should also receive recognition and reward for the work of benefiting others as other workers do.
That's fabulous and that's interesting. But, as a young woman, I was always, and also because, I grew up in India, I came across a lot of people, very traditional, very conservative, who valued women's role within the household very much, and in some sense argued that that's where women belong, and that is what they should be doing. They should not be going out to work and engage in paid work. So by asking for too much recognition, do we run the risk of strengthening these kinds of traditional viewpoints?
No, I think it's just the opposite. I mean, it's one thing to say, yes, of course, women's work is very important, but why aren't they rewarded for it? And why are their other choices so limited? Why are they so constrained in terms of their ability to pursue other paths if it's just something that they naturally derive satisfaction from? So it's not about whether it's productive or not. It's about who captures the benefits of this productivity. In what sense are women able to parlay their care work into their own economic security? Right? That's what's really different about care work and other forms of care work, is care work leaves you economically vulnerable, right? So if people feel like it's good for women to specialize in care work, maybe they should think about providing more economic security and independence in return for doing that work. Because otherwise, I think women will tend over time to opt out of it because of the really serious economic risks.
The pandemic has changed everything, and it's been terrible for women because a lot of the hard-won gains have been completely lost. More women have lost jobs than men, even though unemployment in general is very high. Women have been working in the more vulnerable sectors. In countries like India, unemployment is at an all-time high, so there are anyway very few jobs. So many women have gone back. So I fear a return to the world where the woman stays in the house and does the household chores while the man works hard outside to eke out a living. I'm scared of that kind of a world, So, what can, without a policy push, without significant changes within, coming from the government, I don't see. I fear the return to that old world. So, what would be your recommendation?
Well, first of all, the pattern that you're describing is very global. It's not limited to India. Women have been adversely affected in every country. Their workload is increased in the home, and their opportunities outside the home have been restricted. But it's also true that COVID revealed how heavily we depend on a family safety net. That's what we all fell back on. That's where we all had to hide out. That's where we all took refuge from the pandemic. And I think coming to a better understanding of the importance of family and community as forms of social insurance that really need to be protected and defended, I think that's a good thing. And I'm hoping that women can use that opportunity to bargain for more recognition and reward for that work. And yes, it's going to require government policies. It's going to require government policies that make it easier for men and women to share caregiving tasks, that provide some public support for taking care of other people in the home, to recognize it as something that should be a basis for a minimal basic income. And a lot of these policies are not limited to gender issues. They have implications for inequality and poverty, because most of the families who are really suffering from the most serious forms of deprivation are deprived in part because they're devoting so much of their time and energy to taking care of their families. So it really requires rethinking the big picture. And I think COVID has been a big external shock that's requiring us to think more creatively about social policy, I hope.
Now, the other thing that you speak about many times is about the wage penalty, because women have because women typically specialize in care work. Even in paid work, they are overrepresented in the care sector, yes. And they end up being poorly paid. So I want to understand that wage penalty, and I also want to understand if gender alone explains it, because while you find that a teacher in a village may be earning very badly, whether male or female, but a university professor would be earning very well. Similarly, nurses who do so much work, and in India we call them ashas, and we don't even pay them salaries, we give them a stipend or whatever, who've been working so hard during the pandemic, are extremely poorly paid. But a doctor in a very good hospital would be earning a very good salary. So I want to understand that wage penalty, and I also want to understand how do you explain the difference in earnings within the health and the education sector.
Right. Well, as an economist, I take it for granted that skill and educational level affects earnings. So when I say there's a care penalty, I'm saying, all else equal, taking the, amount of time and effort required to obtain a professional credential really has to be taken into account. So, but I don't know the Indian labor force data, so I'm not really equipped to talk about wage differentials in India. But I can tell you that in the U.S., yes, university professors are paid more than school teachers, but they're paid a lot less than bankers. Working in the financial sector, you produce something that's easily quantified, for which there's a lot of demand, and you can really capture the benefits of what you produce. It's very clear. I produced, a 5%, appreciation of your assets. If you're a teacher, it's very hard to say exactly what it is you produced, and it's also hard to demand it. You don't get paid a share of the increased capabilities of your students. You just get paid based on what it takes to get you to talk you into doing the work, right? So it's very interesting, for instance, in the US, if you look at what doctors earn, yes, doctors earn, they're among the most well-paid jobs, right? But the most well-paid doctors in the US are those that do plastic surgery, which is not paid for through insurance, and there's a market, And a lot of very wealthy people want plastic surgery and they're willing to pay for it. I don't see a lot of social benefits from plastic surgery, whatever, I'm happy if people want to spend their money to enhance their appearance, but there's kind of a disconnect between social value and individual value, because public health physicians are the poorest paid specialty in the US. And here we are in a pandemic where our public health physicians are key to our very survival. But you think about, who pays for public health? Well, it's not some individual who's willing to, pull out their wallet and pay more money. It's a social decision where everybody wants somebody else to pay for it. And it's very bureaucratized. And the benefits are very social and very diffuse, right? So, that's why plastic surgeons earn about 5 times what a public health physician earns, despite pretty negligible differences in their credentials and training. So, to answer your question, you really need to take educational attainment and skill into account. But you also need to take into account this issue of whether you produce something that's easily measurable, for which people are willing to pay individually out of pocket. And that is always advantageous in a market-based economy.
The other thing which intrigues me a lot is that, in the real world, in functional democracies like ours, why is it so difficult for women to come together? Why is their collective bargaining power so low? Why do women as a group mean almost nothing? No election is about women's issues.
Well, I think there are 2 big reasons for that. One is just the legacy of our history. And we've learned it takes a long time to renegotiate social norms and social institutions in ways that empower women. But it's also true that women are very divided. Gender isn't the only form of social identity that leads to disadvantage. A lot of people, including myself, are in very contradictory positions, very privileged by virtue of class or caste, or access to education. And so, in order for people to act collectively and have a strong collective voice, their common interests have to supersede the divisions among them. And in general, you see feminism as a social movement has always been strongest in countries that are relatively egalitarian class-wise, where there are fewer differences. So the Nordic countries would be a very good example there. There's a reason why you see more policies supportive of women in Scandinavia, because in those countries, women are less divided, basically, and therefore have a stronger voice.
In the conventional sense, where governments are trying to pursue economic growth, and we know the pursuit of economic growth, a higher GDP, is not really related to women's welfare. In fact, you can have a very highly growing economy, yet, women can be excessively burdened. Yeah. So should the metrics change? Should we be talking about other things? Should we just dump the GDP, which we now know?
I don't think we should dump it, but I think we should demote it. It should be one of many different indicators. I think we need a kind of dashboard of indicators. One indicator is how that GDP is distributed. Is it based on the extremely high earnings of the top 1% or not? It's truly meaningless to look at an average when the more unequal the country, in some ways, the higher the GDP. So that would be one measure, but bringing unpaid work and some estimate, at least a lower bound estimate of the value of unpaid work, unpaid care work, I think that should be included. I think health outcomes like maternal mortality, child mortality, life expectancy. The United Nations has already moved in this direction with its Human Development Index and other indices, but they haven't really been picked up. And I think they're often resisted by the business community because GDP is a more direct measure of what what their opportunities are, how their success is being measured. So I think it's very, very important to move towards a broader set of measures.
I think part of that happened with the whole discussion around sustainable development and sustainable development indicators. But again, I think the business community is more interested in growth, which is why we hear a lot about growth more than other indicators in the media. Thank you so much talking for us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Good luck.
Thank you.